Welcome to the Flow of Money podcast.
This is where high performance meets financial intelligence. In these discussions, we combine the performance science of flow and flow states with practical wealth management strategies.
The intent is to build a resource for those who believe that high performance mental states can impact wealth and abundance in all its forms so that you can make the impact you want in the time that you have.
Let's get started. I'm Dave Gieselman, flow state coach, breathwork facilitator, and former chef turned high performance nerd. I help leaders and creatives build clarity, confidence, and capacity, teaching the science of staying cool under pressure so you can think clearly and execute fast, especially when things go sideways.
My name is John O'Dea, and I'm a financial advisor. My love is cash flow. I truly love the cash flow generated by businesses for the positive impact that this cash flow can have on the owners, their employees, and their broader community. And this cash flow is never more important than when the owners of these businesses start to execute their exit and succession plan. I just love it all and can't wait to help. You and I traded some notes about a concept that maybe we talk about today.
Yeah. So this idea of cognitive load, and you and I have talked about this in both personally and on the show in many ways, this idea that the human brain can only keep track of so many things at a time. Research in the mid 90s says 7 to 10 like RAM, like active functioning
In
operating.
short-term recallable memory, right? This
Right.
was the story around by phone numbers or 7 digits, right?
Right. And so this idea that uh, when I work with people and they're overwhelmed and they seem stressed out, one of the first things I'm going to tell all of them is grab a yellow pad, write down everything that's on your mind, absolutely everything,
For sure.
all of it. All the goals, the things, the planes to catch, the things that I'm working on, all of the things that are.
And you get to galloping brain, galloping heart rate, right? When
Right.
it wakes you up at night, very common recommendation to get it out of your head and onto a piece of paper at a minimum.
Right. Client deliverables, unpaid invoices, like things, the stack of mail that needs to be, all of it, right? Write down all of it. And what happens is you get 5-10 minutes into this process and you find yourself suddenly writing in complete sentences, everything that hits that list, your brain knows it no longer has to track.
Right.
Like your brain knows it is.
There's a place for it.
It's a place for it, for the same reason we don't remember phone numbers anymore, right? Your brain knows that your phone remembers phone numbers. So it devotes zero more resources to it, right? And anything your brain or your body can devote zero more resources to, it will choose to do exactly that, right? You could not point a gun at me and get me to recall my son's cell phone number. Like, you simply could not. I don't know. There's a 7.
This will be the problem. Like when people are kidnapped for the code to break into the bank, it's like, that's what I have the code remembering device thing for. Like,
right. What's your password for that? Why would I know
Couldn't
that?
tell you.
Right.
Couldn't tell you.
You start pulling out my fingernails, man, because I have no idea.
I got 20 of them. This is gonna be a long day.
It's going to be a long day because I know that code is at least 23 characters long.
There's lots of complicating things in there. And I'm pretty sure my system manages that for me.
Right. So
cognitive load. Yeah.
So when we begin to take on more and more, like, everything just slows down. The working RAM starts slowing down and everything starts overheating, and we begin to lose energy, we begin to lose momentum. And so I was wondering, so what is the financial version of that for wealth building? Obviously, we look at people at the beginning stages of money management and financial management, and it looks like and I did this as a teenager and a college student, like everything was in my head and I didn't check my account balances and I didn't open my mail. I paid the things I had to pay, and I just kind of kept track of everything because there was fear there that I was going to see a number that was not going to jive with what was in my head, and that was going to cause a problem. So if I just don't look at it, I have a pretty good understanding of what's coming in, what's going out, and at any given time, I can guess within a few $100s what's in there. And I think maybe halfway through college, that is not an unreasonable approach. And then at some point, your life just gets more complicated. And so as I think about really taking people into high performance areas in their own lives,
Mm-hmm.
where there's less and less and less cognitive load. I go into, we talked about this last week. I'm going into this environment with a single purpose, with a single goal to do a single thing. I'm not multitasking. I'm not doing anything else. So I'm going in with the lowest possible cognitive load so I can devote as much resources to that as I can. Looking at wealth building, looking at wealth creation, wealth management, what is sort of the equivalent there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think about cognitive load as you've laid it out. I mean, there's certainly aspects of things to be aware of, right, in short-term memory. And then there's effort of a task, right? And I think about them differently, right? In terms of, I'm walking downstairs and I need to remember to, put this in the sink, right? And I'm trying to keep that in memory versus when I get to the sink, I gotta, knit it together, right? There's some task that I need to do, the cognitive load associated with the task. And you and I talk about this in terms of how to grease the skids to enter into flow state around a length of time, right? So, task switching doesn't work very well, right? The multitasking, you really can be focused on one task at a time, right? You're not really multitasking efficiently because there's an expense for each task switch. Every time you switch a task, there's a tax in the switching, right? So you're actually not more efficient when you're multitasking. You're less efficient. My perspective, my understanding of the research on that. But cognitive load comes up in a couple of really important areas in wealth in particular. So um, cognitive load, as I think about it, is the amount of mental effort required to make a decision. So, for example, really good research. There's a whole category of economists who study this area in a range of science called behavioral economics or behavioral science. Um, one of the books that was written on this subject in particular was called Nudge. Nudge is initially a book about the problems that we have in thinking. And when things get hard, we tend to just make no decision. And if we can create the process where there's a default, right, as a nudge, to nudge people in the direction of making the best decision for themselves. A nudge is a framing or a decision design or something that you can do to help people make decisions that are in their best interest. They're not evil. We're not, doing this in a fashion to hurt people. But one of the good examples that I remember from the book was being an organ donor. Right? Most people, when you ask them, they say, "Yep, I'm happy to be an organ donor. Like if I'm dead and my stuff is worthwhile, pull it out and give it to somebody who could benefit." Right? And if there's a body in a box that people can weep around and have a big party, that's fine. But if you can use my stuff, you should use it. Now, in countries where the default is you are automatically an organ donor, but you can go in and complete the paperwork to opt out for whatever reason, for religious reasons. There are certain religions where I need my whole body without anything missing to be buried because I'm going to come back as my whole body. So you can't remove stuff, right? Or, there's different situations where people want to opt out. So if you make it the default, everybody's an organ donor. Unless you complete the form to opt out, you get a participation rate somewhere in the nature of 95% of people are organ donors. If you do it the reverse, hey, if you want to be an organ donor, fill out this form. The participation rate is like 5%. right? So the amount of effort or cognitive load associated with making a decision will often, in and of itself, make it hard for people to do things. So the financial equivalent is you should save for retirement. Awesome. We'll get right on that. So you go to work for an employer, they say, hey, you have an opportunity to participate in our retirement savings program. We built this beautiful investment process. You can participate. Here are the forms for you to complete to get enrolled in the plan. Awesome. And as an employer, but wait, there's more, we'll kick in some. We'll help you. We'll match or contribute. If you do it, we'll help you. We'll match and contribute. That sounds great. I'll get right back to you. Awesome. And then the forms sit there and people don't enroll, right? The cognitive load associated with, okay, I got to make this decision. It feels important. This is investments and money. I sit down, the forms are long. They seem confusing. I got to check boxes. I got to make decisions. Should I do it pre-tax versus post-tax? I heard Roth is really good. Now I'm on Instagram or, Snapchat. I'm asking Chat GPT, should I save Roth versus traditional? And you get about 3 minutes into it and your phone rings and you got to do your job, right? Or you get home and your kids need help. Or you get home and you just got to sleep because you working your tuka off, right? I mean, life gets in the way of the cognitive load of making the decision to participate in the plan. And so when you look at participation in a 401k plan for employers who say, here's a voluntary opportunity, we will match and contribute to your plan for you. There's a whole process to make sure the funds are attractive and monitored. There's educational resources if you want to reach out and do a one-on-one consult. Please, we as an employer take on all of this time and energy and expense and risk and obligation and liability to make this available to you. If it fits, please participate, right? We're not trying to talk you out of it, but we can't, you know, sign the forms for you. Here are the forms. And the participation is really low. And so some of this is the cognitive load associated with making this decision. Any decision gets in the way. Now, legislation has changed. They're aware of this organ donor example where if you set it up in such a way that employees are automatically enrolled, they can fill out a form to opt out. Hey, I can't afford to save anything. I'm doing something different right now where I have to, every single dingle dollar that I have needs to go to digging out of debt, right? Dig out of debt before you really save for retirement, right? There may be decisions. So here's a form to fill out. If you need to get out, fill out the form to get out. And the participation rate hits your 80, 90%, right? Most of the people end up, awesome, that sounds great. If I need to make any changes, I will. They never make any changes. So they're automatically enrolled for their best interest. And not only does the legislation suggest you got to automatically enroll employees now, but you automatically increase the amount that they save or invest, right? Which is also a good best practice from a investment standpoint. Most of us can't afford to save whatever the recommended amount is. If you do the math and you don't have a lot today and you want to have some in the future, you should save, pick a number, 15%. Each person is different, but it's probably not zero, and it's probably not 100%. You got to save as much as you can, right? You need some amount of income to buy burgers. But 15 to 20% is a very common number that people need to save to get to a point where their resources are large enough where work becomes voluntary. So most of us can't afford to jump into the pool right at 15%. But the math is really powerful to suggest it almost doesn't matter. If you can get in for something, 3% of your pay, 4%, just get started. Just say yes, right? Just get in. There's optimizations and tweaks for sure down the road, but the biggest mover is to say yes for the first time, just get into the plan, and then increase it a little bit each year, right? Over a 30-year investing horizon, somebody in their 30s today going to work through their 60s. In a 30-year investment horizon, it almost doesn't matter if you started at 10% or if you started at 5 and just increased each year by 1% to 10. Right? The difference between those two investors by the time you get to 60 is almost statistically insignificant.
Dozens of dollars.
In the grand scheme of things, we could pull up the slides, but for, maybe one's $2 million and the other is 1.9 million. Like, did we really care? Right? We're so close to be at the same retirement age at that time. The legislation and some of the support tools now suggest default people to automatically enroll them and automatically escalate or increase the amount, because we know from a research and data standpoint that most people, when they go through the math and they understand the benefits, would enroll, but the cognitive load associated with making that decision and feeling like you've made a good decision and the sense of complexity associated with the decision means they delay to the point that they fail to enroll and they never get back around to it. And so, that's a good example in the wealth creation space where when there's a cognitive load associated with a project, right? If you have to think about it, it tends not to happen, right? The more that you can make the system automatic, right? That you do the cognitive load once. Yep, this is in my best interest. I want to do it. You set up the process so it's automatic, right? Then it's much more likely to continue. Corollary example, you don't have a 401k plan or you want to save for something else. If the money hits your investment account and then you have to remember to go in to make a decision to transfer that money from your checking account to your investment account,
Never.
it won't happen.
No.
Right? So that cognitive load associated with the process, the more you can automate your systems associated with this part of your life. Same is true with investment decisions. I really like XYZ. I'm going to buy XYZ and I'm going to own it for a long period of time. But investment research would suggest that you should monitor that over time and go back in and check to make sure that it's still the right amount, still the right proportion, still the right tool. And people won't, right? They don't follow the process because of the cognitive load associated with the effort. And they end up with oddly designed portfolios based on stuff that they bought 20 years ago and never revisited in a systematic fashion over long periods of time.
Right. So they got started and never evolved the thing. So at the beginning of the system, right? And we can apply this to just about anyone. The best decision you can make is obviously the right one. The second best decision you can make is the wrong one. The worst decision you can possibly make is no decision at all, is to do nothing.
It's
Right.
a tough outcome, right? There are definitely decisions in cognitive load that we can talk about where you make a worse decision than no decision, and we can talk about that. But making no decision, in terms of taking action, in many respects tends to be, costly, right? In terms of getting started down the path around taking action, getting out of debt, accumulating resources for margin so you can survive the surprises, so you don't get back into debt, accumulating resources for long-term goals and allowing the power of compounding to work in your favor, super powerful. Get started on those. Once you're started, sometimes, it is true that once you're started, the no decision can be helpful. So I'll give you another example. In cognitive load, in the study of cognitive load, there's often in, the decision sciences, there was research in a book written called Thinking Fast and Slow, and there's ongoing, feedback around the book in general. But I think the framing is helpful that most of us have two modes of thinking. And the first is fast, right? We have initial reactions, we make snap judgments, and then we have slow, that it's more complicated. We should slow down and really engage our brain and think about it. And the challenge is, our brains, as we talked about at the beginning, our brains are lazy engines, right? Thinking is expensive from an energy resource standpoint, and the slow process of thinking through an issue, because of its expense from an energy standpoint, is avoided at all costs from a thinking standpoint. So for many of us, the decisions that we make when it comes to money or building wealth is in this fast mode, right? This reactive mode, this, there's lots of ways,
Neurologically, that's the default mode network.
right?
That's like
Exactly.
that's that
Exactly.
that thing that I just automatically do
Yep.
with reactively.
Reactive, right? So reactive. So often you'll see in that default mode, we talk about the fight, flight, or freeze, right? And that process kept us alive. We've genetically been selected to have a very active and successful default mode network that is very fear-based, right? Is risk-based and aversion-based. So when you start to layer this on wealth,
you start to see very poor fast or default mode decisions, where in some of these instances, the best decision is no decision, but that's the one that takes thinking if you can slow down. So, example. So, January of 2020, right? January of 2020, we're starting to hear news sources about a weird flu coming out of China. It starts to, take root and hold through January 2020. People are starting to get very concerned. It's now in the US. Late January, the stock market starts to take hold, and we're concerned that something weird is going to happen from an economic standpoint. So the value of publicly traded companies, end of January, beginning of February starts to slide, and investors are selling their ownership interest in publicly traded companies. When there's a lot of selling and not a lot of buying, the sellers got to discount their stuff to get people to buy it. So the value of these companies starts to go down. And this is what we refer to as a stock market drop, right? A lot of these companies. I don't remember the actual share price, but let's say Apple was trading at $100 January 1st. By middle of March, a share price in Apple, relatively speaking, was trading for somewhere around $70, right? It was 30%. So you had $1 million of Apple, you lost $300,000 of value. And the default mode network, especially in an aversion-based fight or flight, the initial response is to sell.
Stop the bleeding.
I got to stop the losing process. Right? I got to stop the losing process. So when we talk about decisions associated with building wealth in that context, one of the best things that you can do as a starting point is do nothing. Right? Over long periods of time, very well-run companies, as long as you own a lot of them, right? If you own a little bit of 300 companies, any one company goes out of business, not going to be an issue. So you own lots of beautiful, well-run, profitable companies. In general, what other people are doing with their ownership interest shouldn't have a huge impact on what you're doing long-term. And if you own them over a long enough period of time, you will be rewarded with a change in value on your asset. And so just doing nothing and continuing to own it is still better than the default mode network initial reaction of aversion to the loss and selling and getting out.
Right, the knee jerk, and we've talked about this before. So this is when no decision, which is actually a decision.
Yes.
Right. The no decision,
and that's the harder one,
selling.
Right? This is the slow network, right? This is the slow thinking to pause, right? The cognitive load
task
requires
positive network neurologically, right?
Because if we can learn through training and support, right? Every investor, regardless of the amount of training, experience, process, skill, capability, technology, every investor is a professional with the human structure of a ape, right? I manage, a great deal of client money. They trust me, and I'm still a human being. And when losses start to take place, I have the same emotional reaction that every investor does. Right? So I need a process to decouple from the fast mode, right? The fast thinking, the loss aversion, to get to the slow process, because at a minimum, if we can do nothing, the data would suggest that we're probably going to be benefited with returns over a long period of time. But what if we could get to the point where we could take advantage? Right? The value of really attractive things is now 30% off. Could we put ourselves in a position where we could go get these beautiful things at 30% off? Where we were happy to buy them at $100, they're now on sale for $70. We shouldn't be selling. We should find a bank to rob, to go back up the truck, to go buy a boatload, right? And can you put yourself in a position to recognize, yep, I am feeling this feeling for sure, but I have practiced this and set up processes where I knew as soon as this happens, despite the fact that I feel this way, this almost opposite feeling behavior is the one that's going to help me over a long enough period.
Right. And it's the cognitive load of all this stuff is happening, and now I got to keep track of everything that's happening. I got to keep track of the things that I have and what they're doing, and then speculate about what's going on. And so what I'm going to do is I just watch this loss, and I'm just and react, sell, right? It's just it's cognitive load, right? So if we were to look at beginning level is do something, right? Invest 5%. It doesn't matter. Like,
take action.
Take action.
Get started.
Get that 401k going. Medium level, right? Medium level. This is, and so in my world, we start talking about sort of personal development
Mm-hmm.
101.
Mm-hmm.
This is, how do I develop some really good habits, some really good behaviors, such that when difficult things happen, I don't just drop into reactive mode. And so then we start looking at really high level, like removing cognitive load. So I'm really only making the decisions that I must make. And so if we were to look at really removing cognitive load from wealth wealth building, like what are some of the thresholds when I want to like outsource my investments to somebody else? What are the sort of thresholds, and what are the actions that I take at higher and higher levels where I go, no, I'm trusting John O'Dea to do all that. I don't need to be thinking about it. As a matter of fact, the less I think about it, the probably the better off all of us are. And then I end up at the outcomes that I want, with the understanding that John O'Dea is going to come to me. Is it yearly? Is it semi-annually? And go, here's where we are, here's what things did, here's what we need to do. What do you think? So if we start looking at really high level, like really eliminating cognitive load for high speed, uh really kind of flow state wealth management, not from an investment professional's perspective, but from a person who's actively building their wealth, who's building a business, who's sticking stuff in savings, and goes, "Yo, financial professional, you do this part, please."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's an important question because I think the the there's a lot of ways, depending on the mindset of the investor, to enter into this process. And I'll use sort of the continuum of do it yourself through full and complete outsource, right? If that's a range, right, of people, and everybody falls on some point in that continuum, right? I mean, I love the investment process and the minutiae of the technical aspects of investing. I don't understand why everybody doesn't love it. Like we all should figure out the information ratio and the EBITDA, PE multiples, and all of the aspects of scoring and monitoring and making decisions about individual. I don't understand why everybody doesn't do it.
I love that about you, and I would rather be set on fire than devote a second
Right.
of my thinking process
Understood.
to that.
Right. So, I mean, if you're coming to this and you're going to do it yourself, right, then, your process will be different than if you're going to co-create this with somebody or you're going to fully delegate and outsource to some degree. But I'll use an example, right? We use, there's lots of contexts where professionals are delegated the responsibility, but still have the legal obligation um, to the organization or the individual that's delegated that responsibility, right? You still have, so, the conversation I was having this morning, you have an employer, they've set up a 401k plan. The 401k plan or investment process has investments available to the employees. The employer can outsource the process for monitoring those investments, right? To make sure that the investments are good for the employees. But we still expect that the employer is going to monitor me, for example. Like you still have to have a process to monitor the professional that you've outsourced to, right? You can't outsource it and then abdicate responsibility. Well, I outsourced it to them and then I just stopped paying attention to what they were doing. Right? That doesn't work. Right? I outsourced it to somebody and then it turns out that they weren't any good. Well, that's still your fault.
Right. Reducing cognitive load does not absolve you of responsibility. It just
Right.
means that I'm only going to think of certain things when I need to think of them. I'm only going to take on certain tasks when it's appropriate for me to take them on. I'm going to outsource them the rest of the time.
Yes.
But there are appropriate times that this now requires my cognitive capacity.
Yeah. So I think, in any area of excellence that we talk about, physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, right, all the domains that people want to experience high performance in their life, People may still want to experience, and I would expect people want to experience high performance in the financial area of their life, but they may not want to be the person who's physically pulling the levers, right? So, what in any area that you want to experience advancement and progress and excellence and performance at the very highest levels, you need a process, right? You got to follow the steps on a regular basis over long periods of time, and you got to set it up where as much of it as possible is greased, right? As a low cognitive load, you can step into the process in it, and it starts to happen automatically, right? And like in physical wellness, like the more I can keep Twix bars out of my house, the more likely it's going to be that my food process is going to work, right? If I can shop on Sunday and cook a bunch of big healthy stuff that have as leftovers as a process, that makes getting home late Monday night and making me dinner goes better as a process.
Removing friction points, and we as in high performance, we talk about this all the time, is removing friction from making the best possible decisions.
Yep. So I tend to think of the success in this area in sort of three domains. Like if there's a breakdown in somebody's process, there's a breakdown in one of the three domains. Um, the skills or knowledge, things that we can teach you, right? What is an investment? What is a mutual fund? What is a stock, right? The stuff that you can learn, you may not have learned the steps or learned the information that was important. There's the behaviors, right? The actions and activities and processes that you need to do on a regular basis. Like you understand what a mutual fund is, but you're not setting the money aside, right? There's a breakdown there. And then there's the mindset side, right? That we spend a lot of time talking. What are your beliefs about the process, yourself, money, right? That you may believe and you're doing it, but you're sabotaging yourself from a mental standpoint, or the fear associated with the drop in value, or the greed associated with the opportunity, right, is driving. So again, there tends to be a breakdown in somebody's process in one of those areas. But in general, if you're setting up your own process, you do need to think about it that way. Like you got to budget some amount of time that's going to have cognitive load on a regular basis to review your process, whether you're doing it, you've outsourced it, some combination. And as long as you budget and schedule some amount of time, could be 15 minutes a day, could be 15 minutes a week, right? Whatever your budget will allow from a time and allocation standpoint to budget for your wealth management process. If you are, like many, benefiting by bringing somebody into your process to help, right? You've outsourced it, or you've brought a professional in to help you pick investments, right? You have an investment advisor, a wealth manager, you have a professional supporting you, just like I would bring you into my practice. I need a professional to help me in this area. I want a shooting coach, I want a fitness coach, I want a nutrition coach, I want a wealth management coach. Like if you're going to bring somebody into your life, they're going to enter into your process and you're going to work together collaboratively over long periods of time. And then what you do and the importance and the priority and the steps tend to flow from that perspective. Like you and I work on, goals and objectives. What are you trying to accomplish? Where seem to be the roadblocks and friction points? And how can we set this up in a way where it happens automatically, right? Where we're working the flywheel in a system where what you spend, right, is just of available resources. You're allocating to your goals. You're refreshing the process, and the storehouses that we've selected are in alignment with your tolerance for the goals and objectives that you've laid out. And again, as a wealth manager in my practice, I don't care what the storehouse is, but you need to be eyes wide open around what you've selected and understanding the risks and issues associated with it. It could be rental properties or cryptocurrency or art on the wall or classic cars or watches. You're buying Rolexes and selling them on the used marketplace for the markup that you get. But I don't really care, right? But I want you to understand the issues associated with the storehouse that you take on, and publicly traded securities, companies that you invest in. I believe in because of the cash flow that they generate, and the cash flow will produce value over long periods of time. And they tend to be a very easy tool to manage. If you're an investor in a company, it doesn't take a lot, but that's my bias. If I'm coaching you, we're finding your bias. What do you believe in? What are you passionate about, so that your storehouse of value? And then as you begin to monitor, whether you've co-created this or partnered with somebody, monitoring the process using your steps, you get better at it over time, right? That doing the process makes you smarter, better at running it, right? So if you're, you know, again, the actions or the stuff that you learn, what I tend to find is in sort of process maturity, right? The first phase tends to be people start doing stuff, right? The action side of the three phases. They just start doing things, which is great. And then, the phase of maturity of the excellence or the world classness of their process improves when they start to realize, darn, I need to learn more about doing the right things, right? So the second phase tends to be, I'm going to learn the right things. I'm going to still do it, but I'm going to try to learn the right things. And it does improve and start to optimize because they're smarter about the process.
And is this a good place for those who don't who understand that investing is smart but don't want to learn it? Is this where you introduce a financial advisor?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. I mean, this is, my sense of picking investments as a tool, just like an area domain. I mean, Kobe Bryant knew how to play basketball. He still had basketball coaches, right? And so again, as you bring in a professional to help you, that doesn't alleviate your need and obligation to get smart about what is that person doing, right? And how do I tell whether they're doing a good job on my behalf, right? If I've empowered them to act on my behalf in the marketplace for my best interest, what are they doing and how do I score or understand what is a relevant range of outcomes so I can tell whether they're doing a good job or not? Right? Same process if you bring in an employee to come work for you to take over a job that you're currently responsible for. If you're going to delegate that and empower them to act on your behalf, you need to be able to monitor that they're doing a good job. Right? And so some of the education that you're learning, right, is either I'm going to do it myself enough or I'm going to at least learn how to monitor somebody that's co-creating this process for me or that I've outsourced to altogether. And I'm going to continue to try to optimize and improve that. And where in a lot of instances, the process really accelerates is not necessarily in the knowledge part, but in the mindset space. That's where you and I find that it's, you know, real high performance doesn't start to J curve and jump off the page until you start to work on the mindset. Now, you have to have some of the basics. You need to be doing the things, you need to be learning for sure. But the leverage where you really start to see the on the scatter graph of normal performance and then this odd dot over here, what's that person doing? You know, they're doing a lot of the same things and this extra mindset work around their process, right? They're doing some of those things that really drives their performance to the next level. But for most folks, you got to get started in the basics, right? Actions first, right? Take actions that are in your best interest. Start to learn, right? Learn by doing to some degree. You're going to improve. And again, over short-term periods of time, most of the time, if you're doing some good core basic things, you're going to be fine. There is this fear of missing out that tends to drive people to learn a little bit and return chase some, where sometimes they're making decisions that, experience will help them do differently in the future. But I do find the difference between taking action and taking poor action is relatively minor, right? Provided they're doing some basic stuff. But they will find that, yep, I get it. I understand this process to some degree, and I realize the advantage and leverage of having a professional as part of my team adds to the process, right? And that collaboration, that co-creation, that this is your goals and objectives. How do I help you accomplish your goals and objectives as a professional on your team? What are you trying to accomplish? And then again, co-creating the skills and mindset to do a world-class job, regardless of who's sitting in that chair for you as your wealth manager, or your, the person that you've delegated this role to. Yeah, that cognitive load, you do need to break down. I mean, if there's how many areas? Money, physical, career, like the different domains that people want to see in terms of excellence. You can't spend 3 hours on each domain every day.
Sure, sure. Well, and that's when we begin. So the wealth grows, and now the number of storehouses of value that I am invested in and the complexity of my financial situation, because I have run a concrete business
Right.
well, such to the point that I have sent John O'Dea tons and tons and tons of money,
Yes.
and you have managed. At what point, right? Do I now go, okay, so even the cognitive load of being sort of on, having, like, it has now gotten more complex than I as a business owner sending money to my financial advisor. Like, I need to take more of that off, because now it's just too much. And what are sort of those financial levels where I now, really what I'm doing is I'm having my CFO talk to you, or my family office CFO is now, and I'm now going, okay, what I want to see, the markers of good and or poor performance are, like, I want to be kind of in a particular zone, but outside of that I really can't. It's just too complex for me to manage at that point. What's that look like, and where is that? And where are
Yeah.
those sort of thresholds?
Yeah. I mean, it depends. Um, I do think with um, the scale of the wealth that we're talking about, opportunities starts to come up to bring in resources to specialize and optimize and outsource or co-source. No different than thinking through the structure of a company, right? As we've talked about in an organization, when you start your company, you need to think through the organizational design of all of the activities and who's accountable and responsible for the activities and the processes for that company to be successful. Build out that org chart. When you start, your name's in every one of those boxes, right? And you know, you can't afford to put somebody else's name in that box until you get to a certain size, right? So if you have zero expenses and the fully loaded labor cost of a CFO is $250,000, like you got to get to $250,000 of revenue to afford to outsource that, right? And reset down to the next level from a process standpoint. So in wealth management, it's the same, right? You got to be the CEO, right? You got to set the vision, the culture, the values, the goals and objectives. Where are we going? Why are we going there? You got to be inspiring to yourself or community, right? Your family, if there's people involved. Like, you got to be the CEO. You got to be operations, like physically, how are we going to do this? Like, we're going to hire people, we're going to do process. Like, I got to clean the house. I got to, there's a physical operational stuff. There's IT, like, I can't forget my password. There's, human resources, right? And building culture and people and values. There's finance, right? And this is some of what we're talking about. That finance is often income, expenses, tax. Sometimes in operations or finance, we'll have legal. Like, in a person's life, there are a lot of the same processes that we got to master. And as people start to scale from a wealth perspective, they do hit these limits where sometimes it's helpful to reset down or start to partner, and you can afford to do it like as a percentage of your assets. It's not that meaningful to hire an estate planning attorney for $1,000 to do an estate plan rather than to go on Nolo Press and do a crappy free one, right? It's just, but at the size range where, all of a sudden, again, I do believe that everybody needs a core estate plan, and it's just a tax we got to pay because it's, good process. But, realistically, you could probably get through a lot where you don't have to spend that tax until your net worth is north of 500,000, maybe closer to 1 million. And you could debate that. So there are some pieces that start to come up, but just talk about the wealth piece for a second. I do think that having some amount of limited coaching starts at zero, right? And 0 to 250, it's not easy to find high quality fiduciary caliber advice to help you. So I find that a hack can often be getting some of that at the workplace. If you do work for an employer that has a retirement plan, sometimes you can rub up against folks who will help you from an investment standpoint around the workplace stuff, and you can apply that in your life personally.
Right.
There's
I
other places.
remember I remember when I was working at a club or a hotel that, they had the Transamerica guys who would were happy to get on the phone with you and explain anything or help you strategize,
Yep.
all of
And
that.
you can often hijack some of those conversations and get some pieces of information that are helpful that you can apply in your own life. Somewhere around, 50,000 is a minimum. Some institutions will jump in and help and take on some of that stuff for you. And there's some, quality stuff that's available. There's plenty of institutions that can do it at zero, right? There's, machine-based trading that can take place and be helpful. um, Having human assisted coaching as a process, for a human to be efficient and effective at that level, probably starts to cost $5,000 a year. And so, roughly you're either writing that as a check or you have assets north of 500,000 or more, where that starts to become efficient for you to source and, rough math. That's not entirely true, but that's just rough math.
And
And
if
then,
somebody was listening to this and they're like, okay, I want to start thinking like a rich person. I love the idea of high performance. So where kind of these thresholds, and what do they all look like?
yep. Yeah. I mean, I think, many institutions, you can get started as a do-it-yourselfer and do a very good job, you know, at zero, right? Just to get started. Um, Again, at the workplace, sometimes there's resources to be helpful. A great deal of basic information is historically accurate on a backward facing basis if you're asking a large language model, right? If you're asking basic information to a chat GPT or a copilot,
Give me best practices.
best practices and process around that stuff. Again, my perspective is that the technology and the process is advancing where some of the portfolio construction and investment decision stuff technology is solving. The real optimization and high performance stuff is going to be around mindset and the cognitive loads knitting together adjacent problems around tax, legal, investment, cash flow, business stuff where the complexity is going to be harder. But 0 to 500, there's lots of people out there who can point you in solid directions. There's good basic information that's available. I do think that there's an advantage to some amount of human supported technology at 500 and above. Clearly north of 1 million. I think team-based stuff is going to be important. I think there's a broad-based set of financial questions that come in. Anytime you're dealing with a life change, I think it's super important to have human supported advice. You're having a kid, somebody's died, you're going through a change in your marital relationship, there's, changes at work. You really want a clear picture of what the future looks like, planning, back to cognitive load. For most of us, the planning associated with how do I get there. Again, if you're an employee and you make $80,000 a year and you're spending 70 of it and you think you can set 10,000 aside, I think there's a lot of that you could probably do yourself. I think if you run a business or, there's, can I retire, right? It's a multivariable scenario. I'm thinking about downsizing and moving to Arizona, funding college and retiring by 60. All of a sudden the cognitive load is now exponential, right? It's not just additive, right? Because all of a sudden your spreadsheet has to reference and overlap too many different inflation variables, scenarios, stress tests, and things, where having somebody with software and experience to help support the multivariable scenarios,
Yeah,
I think
because I
that's some
can't do
value.
that and my job.
Right.
Right. I
And
can't
the
do
first
that and
time
my
you
job.
do it is you're not going to do it a lot, right? So the first time you learn to do it, you don't really want to be like, I work a lot with people who are planning to sell their company someday. And that may be the only time they sell a company. Like, that really can't be a learning exercise. That has to go well, right? And
And the 19-year-olds trying to figure out what to do with $5,000 to $7,000 make some mistakes. Like,
yes,
learn stuff.
get
Do
started.
it yourself
Yep.
and get
There's
started.
very good, you could ask Copilot, what does a good core investment portfolio look like? And There's concepts about asset allocation and diversification and getting started. You will be tempted through Robinhood and Snapchat and other things to take a different approach from an investing standpoint that I don't think is very supported in the data and the research. But getting started tends to be very straightforward and engage in the process. And why did it go up? Why did it go down? Why did it suggest this versus that? How does this process work? Who's getting paid? Who's financially motivated for me to make this decision? Like, be curious and open about the process and build a community of like-minded, individuals around you who are also interested in the same things and working in the same way. I mean, this is, if you're really trying to, work on your health, you really don't want to hang out with people who are forcing you to eat pasta, right? I mean, you want to, really want people who are excited about the same things and they're not fired up about copious amounts of, external signals of wealth. They're trying to save their own money, right? They're trying to underspend and oversave and not buy cars or, clothes or extras that just don't pan out towards long-term goals, right? And so the cognitive load piece is hard because the amount of effort to learn something new and then apply it, it just, when you taught me breath work, I didn't feel very skilled at doing breath work the first time, right? It felt hard. It felt complicated. It pulled me out of flow. Like I kept, this guy's weird. His, music's weird. His beard is weird. Like it's,
Am I doing it right?
I asked myself this morning. Yeah. No, I think the cognitive load associated with these steps is as much as you can chunk down and budget. All right, I'm going to burn some brain cells on this project once a month, right? And commit to it and get it done. And then, if you can nibble at it over long periods of time, you will change your life. I really believe really small sniffs of advancement in the wealth area over long periods of time. All of a sudden, you're going to look back over the trajectory or the time frame associated with these things. It takes hard work, right? You got to make money you don't spend. You got to set it aside in a storehouse of value, and that sucks. Like I want to spend it. There's stuff I want today. There's a long list of stuff that I want today. There is no shortage of places that offer sandal tans.
Right.
I want to visit them all.
My list keeps getting longer. My list of things that I want to spend money on keeps getting longer every time I get introduced to something that I'm like, oh, okay, now I need that. Now I need to go there. Every time I see, someplace with warm blue water where there are dogs to pet and crispy pork to eat, now I suddenly need to go there.
What is it about warm blue water that attracts fluffy dogs and crispy pork?
Oh, I don't know.
That's a long list.
Yeah.
What do they do? What do they do? Crispy pork and Greece.
I have no doubt they do crispy pork.
I'm sure there's something.
In Greece. Yeah, sure no doubt. Oh, there's the food. If you bounce between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn and just wander around the world, there is so much warm blue water, crispy pork, and dogs to pet. It's just ridiculous. And once again, there are way worse indicators that I am living a life that I want to live is if the rest of my life, vacations and free time are spent on bouncing between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn and eating all the crispy pork, swimming in all the blue water, warm blue water, and petting as many dogs as I can.
I love it, right? That is now the visualization that your team and the universe can conspire to make happen, right? Like now we can start removing obstacles to experience that on a more regular and consistent basis, right? And
now that vision exists, I can stop thinking about what does wealth look like to me. I am very clear, and I can end that conversation. Very similar, when you get married, I notice, when you get married, the amount of energy and thought and effort and stuff that goes into finding that other, right? And then you find that other, and the day after you get married, there's suddenly, in a healthy environment, all things remaining equal, in a healthy environment.
Sure.
But sort of the day after you get married, there's suddenly this realization that all of the energy that I have expended there she is. I got a ring and a signed piece of paper that say that this is now my partner, and that energy can now go into other stuff. And so even when we look at partnerships, communication, all of it is around reducing cognitive load, eliminating friction from the life that I really want to live.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I think that process in wealth management is as true in any other, right? I won't say that it's more important, but there are clearly problems of cognitive load and the brain bugs that we have associated with cognitive load that are meaningful in their negative effect on accomplishing your wealth goals, right? We use heuristics and rules of thumb to make quick decisions, and those aren't always helpful in the wealth management, so there's cognitive load around making a better decision, right? This fast default mode versus the slower thoughtful mode. And so you really, in this space, like all the others that we talked about, right, our default mode in relationship, right, high performance. um, when we get home, we may have habits that are not helpful, and it takes more thought and process to make sure that we're connecting with our partner and, being curious and engaged with our partner, where our default mode network may not do that. So there's cognitive load around excellence in any area that you want to experience. And in, that challenge around money is sticky, like many of these areas, right? Our identity is tied up in it, our loss aversion, right? The fight or flight is a real thing,
Safety,
right?
like
Safety,
bottom
sense
line
of
safety.
safety, right? And the obstacles around the desire to spend and to be, seen and outwardly successful and desirable, and just the obstacles to making money and not spending it, and being in a community where having used crappy stuff and picking up furniture on the corner might be in your best interest from a wealth management standpoint, right? To not spend our dryer squeaks, right? I mean, just the money that disappears on stuff, right? And you know, it squeaks. Do I have to replace it? Well, now it squeaks and it's leaving like, squeak marks on the clothes. So, just right. The spending, right, along with the stuff that I want, right, in terms of hobbies and passions and interests. And so the wealth stuff, high performing wealth management process to really create a system that crushes your wealth management goals in a way that you're fired up and excited about is really going to be personal, right? It's really going to be like there's a investment team that is uniquely focused, passionately focused. These are the highest quality investment professionals that I've ever met, right? They're super bright, and their passion is backing organizations that have a female-friendly agenda, right? Women-led, in particular, leadership teams, board-level spots, and decisions that are in alignment with a broader agenda that has while a bottom line result, we want to invest in companies that are attractive and growing. We should be able to overweight to some degree from a risk management standpoint companies that are willing to bring in diverse viewpoints, especially from a gender lens, and they tend to be potentially more resilient. Like, if you're interested in investing that way, like all of a sudden you're freaking fired up about what's in your investment portfolio, where before it was you know, ABC Mutual Fund, right? Do you care? Like now you're connected to the team that's picking these awesome companies because of the stories of, the first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and, or the team that's really going out on the edge from a healthcare decision standpoint. That's, so all of a sudden you're engaged and fired up and connected to the mission and purpose of what you're doing. And not spending $1,000 and realizing, well, that's a plane ticket to Cabo where I could get some sandal tan.
Right. Right.
Um,
Well, and now you can start now you have a team that is making decisions that are in alignment with your values,
Yes. Yep.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I feel good that the team that I have selected is making decisions that are in alignment with what is important to me. What whatever's important to you. Like I'm not here to tell anybody what should be important to them. However, you should be reducing cognitive load with people
Yes.
who understand what your values are.
Yes.
And so I guess the final question. So the Kobe Bryants of the world. So
Yes.
ultra high net worth
Mm.
individuals
Mhm.
who did not make their ultra high net worth, and let's just say relatively newer money. They didn't invest it, they built it.
Right. They're a creator, right? They're a
They're
wealth
creative,
creator
right? Wealth
in
creators,
a domain that wasn't specifically investments,
right?
right? They built
What
a,
are
like, go ahead.
what are they doing with their wealth management? Ultra high net worth individuals. Like I'm busy building. Busy building. You know the Chat GP, the next Chat GPT. You know, I'm building the next thing. I've built Perplexity from the ground up. I
Right.
am now an ultra high net worth individual,
Yep.
and spending time thinking about how to invest is just not where I'm at. I'm doing this. What are they doing? How are they trusting other people? The the super high financial performers that are not focused on the finance piece.
Yep. So it won't surprise you that the answer is the specifics are different, but the process is often the same, right? So at that size scale, you can afford to write down what is my investment process and decide together, right? You could have an investment policy statement, and that takes time and energy and effort. And sometimes you're delegating to a team that's you know developing the investment policy statement or the investment process. But the process of making good decisions about what you buy, when you buy it, how you buy it, and what form you buy it, what are the range of options that are available to us to buy. Like if you're investing out of a pool of $50 million, you have a different range of things that are available to you to buy than if you're investing out of a pool of $500,000. Right? There are things that their minimum entry point is $1 million, right, or $5 million, right? And depending on your timeline, they, we came across a situation where the yield on buying timberland is fantastic, but you have to have a 50-year time horizon. So, and it's you can't necessarily buy $10,000 of it, right? So, I mean, it's just a different entry point. But the process of making that decision gets outlined in what is our process, what are our goals and objectives. Like if you talk about um, some of these private universities have endowment funds that are billions, right? They're investing out of a fund that is billions, right? And they follow a process, right? They have an investment policy statement that declares this is a process that we're going to follow. These are the things that we're going to buy. This is how we're going to monitor whether they're a good decision or not. This is our time frame, and they meet on a regular basis to make sure that the process is working, right? So, you know, if I'm worth $100 million, right, and the best use of my time is to go make the next 100 million, right, then you're going to set up a system of people, technology, and process that you can manage. Again, as the chairman and CEO of your life, set the vision and goals and objectives. What do I want this $100 million to accomplish? Right? What risks or issues am I willing to take with it? I have two very similar clients. They have a large pot of resources to invest from, and one wants to make sure it doesn't go down. And the other is, I don't think I'm ever going to spend it. I'm really a steward of this resources for future generations. Let's get it to grow as much as possible. Right. And they're very similar resources. The first one, from a sense of safety standpoint, I'm not sure really needs it all, but just wants to make sure that it doesn't go down. Like, I don't have to get it to grow. Like it could be super safe and just click along and earn 3-4%, and I would be fine. Awesome. And then the other family, they're they have other sources of wealth that they're creating, right? They're creating the next $500 million company, right? This resource that is being invested on their behalf, you know, they don't want the $20 million to go away, but what they really want is it to be worth 40 or 60, right? They really want a process from a thoughtful standpoint that it grows over time and they understand the trade-offs associated with it. But the decisions of what to buy, while very different, the process is the same. Goals and objectives, we're going to declare in a written statement, we're going to have a very formal and clear process because the resources are so big, right? We really want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And so we actually have a page, right? There's an investment policy statement, a document. It might be 20 or 30 pages that's going to outline what are we going to follow and what's available to us and how are we going to evaluate the next cool, shiny thing that comes up, right? There's a Dunkin' Donuts that's for sale. There's a cryptocurrency that's being offered. There's a, diamond mine. I mean, at that size range, your opportunities really start to expand, but the process of deciding around it is still a process, right? Goals and objectives, resources, trade-offs, time frame, risk tolerance, non-financial factors around values and culture, right? I mean, the, you know, religious institutions have endowments that they manage and they really can't be invested in, porn companies, right? So they have a process that's declared and sets out the asset classes and the things and how they're going to monitor, how they're going to measure whether it's a good one or not, the timeframes associated with it. So the ultra affluent, call it, 10 million and above of investable assets, net worth of $50 million. It's still a process, and the written process allows for a greater team, and the process document, right? The goals that, like, you would have a business plan, like you and your wife sit down and you have an annual business plan. That's your process document, right? You've written it down, you've declared it, and you've got a set of rules that will help you guys make decisions from a trade-off standpoint when the next decision comes up. Well, how does this tie back to our plan, right? And there are definitely very fun, creative, novel, interesting things out there that when your resources start to expand beyond $5 million, more at 50 million. But I mean, again, there's really bright, capable people out there that want to tap into the economic value that's being created on the planet, but some of it's complicated and you need some size to be able to do, like, if you're going to take a concentrated position, as of the recording of this podcast, there's a company called, that's not even using it, but it's a privately held company. It's going to go public at some point. If you had an opportunity to buy some of that stock before it was public from an early founder, you're probably, your minimum entry point might be $10 million. Well, that's a problem if that company fails and goes to zero, if that's your only $10 million, right? So, I mean, some of these things, you really need some size and scale to make sure that that position is in proportion to the risk that you can take. Yep.
So
Does that answer your question?
no, it really does. And actually it brings the next one up. And so final question, exact same question, mid-20-year-old, mid-20s, college, fresh out of college,
Yep.
eking their way through the world.
Yes.
What are the first 3 to 5 things that if like I'm working a decent job,
Yep.
I'm getting by, I'm living okay.
Yep.
And what are the things that I need to be looking at in terms of processes? Like, bottom line, I want to be financially successful. I want to invest. What are the things that I need to do and not do?
Yep. So again, I would encourage the process. What are your goals and objectives? Write it down, make it specific. Like, what does that look like? Right. And as much as you can turn, I want sandal tans, you need to turn that into a number. Sandal tans means I need an extra $50,000 a year of spending because a trip is $10,000. I want to take 5 trips, one every other month. Right? Awesome. $50,000 means, rough math, we need 1.5 million of investable assets of some kind to be able to throw off the kind of income to cover 50 grand a year. Now we have a number to work towards. Now we can figure out how to back in. So you always got to start with goals and objectives as best you can. Can you make it time boxed and, 5 years out, 10 years out? Pick a number that seems to make sense to you. What are you trying to accomplish? When you back into it, you will probably end up with some range of some core things like eat your kale, drink, make sure you get some sleep and rest, right? Just fucking breathe, right? There's some core things that everything. So, debt, right? Debt is an expense. For many kids in their 20s, college debt is a challenge. You need to come up with a process to address the college debt and set it on auto pay, right? And get out from under that process as best you can. Credit card debt is catastrophic, right? Is it a negative that's working against you? So before you really can get started attacking growth side, right, and building assets, you got to get out from under the expense, right? Rough math, if your credit card is costing you 15%, it'd be very hard to buy an asset that grows faster than that expense is taking you negativer, right? So you got to dig out to some degree or set up a process to get out from credit card or consumer debt or college debt hopefully was something that was an investment that produced value that will make you more valuable in the future, on the trajectory of positive debt. But it is expensive and the interest rates on that are challenging, can't be discharged. College debt is tough, but if you're 20s and you got it, come up with a process, pick a paid off in 10 years, right? And just make the payments that it's done in 10 years. Make enough income, spend as little so that there's money left beyond that to get a credit card debt. Then build up a cash reserve. So have 3 months of what it costs for you to live in a savings account. Doesn't have to be fancy, just cash available so that you don't end up with credit card debt, right? Build yourself a little bit of resilience.
I don't think I'm hearing you being a no credit card guy. If I don't want credit card debt, how do I avoid that and still be able to rent a car with a credit card and do all those things? Are you a no credit card guy?
No. I think credit cards is a way to spend as a tool. The challenge with credit cards is if you are spending beyond what you can cover, right? So
pay to zero every month.
Yeah, you need to find a income and expense level where at the end of zero, your debt gets to zero. And if you're carrying credit card debt into the following month or you have a current balance, you need to tackle that and get it to zero. Because the debt associated with credit cards is an expense that grows faster than typically the value of assets grow. So your net worth is going negative when you carry a credit card balance. So credit cards, I think, are powerful as a tool, provided you pay them off and get to zero at the end of the month. So I'm not a no credit card. The challenge is for many people, the credit card creates the opportunity to overspend because they have the capacity. So you got a mindset.
It's almost viewed as income.
Yes. Yep. And you don't necessarily feel like the interest that you're going to pay is that expensive. But as an investment guy, investing in a high quality fashion over long periods of time, even if you knock it out of the park, and I don't think you can, but let's say you earn 12%, like your credit card debt is growing at 19%. Like you can't earn your way out of it. You really got to try to get to zero as best you can. Once you get to zero, use credit cards to pay it, build up points. There's some security protections. If it's hacked, right, you've got a little bit more protection than if it's your ATM. Credit cards can be a useful tool, but live in a way where your credit card balance gets to zero and you can pay it off. And the way you tend to do that is to make sure that your spending levels at a current level, but surprises happen. This is where your cash reserves need to come in. So you got to have cash reserves for the surprise. Your tire blows, or like me, my dryer's squeaking and going to break and I got to fix it or something, right? You got to have cash reserves so you don't end up with the surprise expense on a credit card and now you're digging out again, right? So get your credit cards to zero. Once they're at zero, build up a cash reserve, 3 to 6 months of your living expenses just in checking and savings. You can tweak and optimize what's the best savings account. I don't really care that we're now into the rabbit hole of optimization. The big ticket is have cash reserves. 3 to 6 months of your living expenses has the cash reserves. Once you're there, then your excess is going to the medium and long-term goals that you have in your life, saving for retirement, saving for your house, saving for sandal tans, whatever the goals is. Now you've built your fortress of solitude from a financial planning standpoint. You've got credit cards at zero, you have a process for college debt, you have cash reserves for the surprises that are coming. Now you can attack these medium and long-term goals and set up an automated process, again, cognitive load, to invest in a systematic fashion for house or car or college for your kids or retirement or the sandal tans or whatever they are. So most of the time there's a cascade in order. You need to add risk management in there. God forbid something happens to you from a health perspective, especially if you're coupled up and you have a kid, there's obligations that'll carry on even if you don't. You may need to add some expenses, which always stinks, but you got to add an expense. The tax of an estate plan, you're probably going to need to do an estate plan. That's a once and a review every 3 to 5 years, but you're probably going to need some risk management tools like a
What's
basic
the trigger?
insurance.
What's the trigger for an estate plan? Right. I don't know anything about it. I'm 24 years old. I got a kid on the way. What's the trigger? Is it an amount of money? Is it a life event? What's the trigger on
Generally
a
speaking,
estate plan?
the challenges that the estate plan helps to address is somebody to step in and operate your life if you don't have the capability to do so. That's one trigger, right? So if you have a checking account, savings account, and some assets, if you don't have an estate plan and you're in a coma, it's very hard to step in and help that person pay their bills and run their life and take care of them from a design standpoint. So even single with very minimal assets, there's some core documents depending on the state that you live in that are super helpful from an estate planning standpoint. Beyond that, in certain states, $150,000 of asset level, owning a home, having a checking account, some specific types of assets over a certain threshold. There's some technical answers to this, but roughly over 100 grand, you really need a little bit more detail in your estate plan to make sure that your assets go where they're supposed to go. Even if you're not around anymore, you're dead. Over a certain size asset thresholds, depending on the state that you live in, the courts are required to step in and make sure that your assets go where they're supposed to go, unless you have a defensible set of written instructions. So under 100 grand, the estate plan components tend to be helpful to make sure that we can help you and talk to your institutions if you're in a coma and lack capacity to make decisions for yourself. Beyond that, there's some asset transfer stuff that is much more helpful. Once kids get involved, we really want to make sure that there's custodian relationships established and things like that, that if I'm not around or both my wife and I aren't around, that we've got some legal process set in place where, again, we don't have to go to court to establish who's the custodian of this minor child so that they can make decisions. So any wealth threshold, if you have a kid, you need an estate plan. Or estate planning for anybody just to help operate your stuff. Call it over $150,000 of non-retirement assets. So if you have retirement assets, that has a different set of issues. But rough math for most folks, if you're in your 20s, we need some basic stuff. Like when my kids went to college, if they went to the hospital's not going to talk to me, right? Because I'm not them. And there's no written, permission that they gave, right? A healthcare directive that I was authorized legally to be able to access their medical records and be able to talk to financial institutions and access their information, right? So that gets complicated if your kid's in a car accident, right? It's a problem, right? So that's a form of estate planning documentation as a young person. You want to, think through that process as best you can from a legal standpoint. I do recommend, professionals to help you with that process, and the automated systems are tempting to do for, you can get divorced for $500, and I don't recommend that you do it. That you have some amount of legal support through some of these big decisions and changes. But yeah, estate planning, good question.
So, if somebody's listening to this, like someone at any level of the financial spectrum can learn about what high performance looks like in like sort of in the place on the spectrum that they're on,
Yes. Yes.
and go, okay, so in this particular place in my life, this is what high performance looks like. This is what I want to be thinking about. This is what reducing cognitive load while increasing the value of my current asset assets are. So
Yeah. I mean, I
no,
think
that's
as
really
you're 20, right, you need to hurry up and get on those experiences that you can do that somebody will pay you for, right? What is the best use of your time? And it may be unclear. So you may be doing anything, right? But you need to make money, right? You need to deliver value to somebody in such a fashion that they're eager to pay you in exchange, right? And some of that may be basic stuff: show up on time, show up early, work late, right? Show up and look professional, right? There may be just basic stuff where you gotta, get into a role that may or may not have long-term trajectory, because you got to get to the point where you're making more than you spend. And that's the spending side. It tends to be a mental piece. Again, back to, taking action, knowing how to do the right action and what you think about the action. The mental part around underspending can't be minimized, right? You got to underspend what you make. You got to pick a good storehouse of value. And you got to stay out of debt, and you got to do it in a fashion that you just love being you, right? Because there isn't a quick fix, right? This process is going to take time. So you got to love what you're doing, who you're doing it with, who you're doing it for, in some capacity over a long enough period of time where you're willing to do it, right? And in a fashion that's sustainable. So you know, what you make isn't always controllable, right? The what you spend piece tends to be up to a certain threshold, the controllable piece. And we all need to eat, right? We need a place to live. We need some core insurance components for medical care and safety, right? There's some core stuff we need to get to from a minimum threshold standpoint. And beyond that, then the question is this an investment? Is this a spend? Is this an expense? But the to blow out and crush your wealth management process for you, regardless of where you're starting, I still tend to break it down into the process pieces and building it into your system on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. Like, check back with yourself and make sure that you're setting a goal, you're measuring it back to the goal, and you're staying on track, and you're uncovering, well, what took me sideways? What were the obstacles that kept me from getting there? Because the obstacles are going to come up, right? That's where you're going to learn your stuff.
right. Not don't make mistakes, but observe the ones that you
No.
make. Go
Yes.
back and go, okay, so
Yep.
what did I trip over? Right. And how could I not do that again? And I think that's really one of the big pieces of high performance is high performers aren't really afraid. They make quick decisions because they're not afraid of making mistakes. They
Yes.
are clear that any mistake I make can probably be fixed.
Yes.
Right. Not many of us are at risk of sinking continents
Right.
or are really creating like catastrophic sort of stuff with with basic life decisions.
Yeah. I mean, I liked, so one of the writers out there talked about this fear of other people's opinion, this FOPO,
Mm,
right? That it's not necessarily the fear of making a mistake. It's the fear of, making a mistake in front of somebody else. Like, if you can let that go, right? And then you can lean into the joy of the curiosity, right? We can still fear to make a mistake, and we can develop a process where, you know, we can want to avoid mistakes. But if we're avoiding mistakes because of being seen, right, other people's opinions of if we can let that piece go and really just drive forward and take action that's on in our best interest, and try to ease, the being seen to have made a mistake resistance, that connected for me as a concept. That fear of other people's opinions, if you can really start to let that go from a high performance standpoint, to connect to, dealing with the stress of something going sideways, less on how other people are perceiving you because it went sideways, and crap, something just surprised me, right? That wasn't what I expected. What can I learn from this? How do I get better so that the next time, this isn't, this is more successful, right, from a process standpoint.
Right, because we don't get to control like geopolitical, sociopolitical. Like we get to be ready, right? We get to be resilient.
Yes.
We don't get to control that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. And again, it's that comes with some practice and some training, and there's some pieces that can help there.
Which is also an important part of reducing cognitive load. If I'm not putting a bunch of energy into controlling geopolitical and sociopolitical like sort of movement with my mind and
Right.
fretting a lot about it, then I can put that energy into, I can reduce that cognitive load. Look, I can't control that. What I can do is make sure that my processes are attached to my values, and I am in actions that I can control, and I am making decisions. I am making decisions. I'm living a life with intention, right? And if that decision is this decision, or purposefully making no decision, right? Going back to where we began, I am purposely not doing anything.
No different than, the coaching you provide me, right? I'm going to set out this goal to improve my resilience to surprises and anger and frustration, knowing that I'm going to mess it up, right? And it's not that the distraction's never going to happen again, or I'm going to wake up as you describe, that eventually I'm going to be waking up every morning loving to work out, right? Some of that's never going to happen. The issue is, what am I learning when the next negative voice comes up? Like, can I pause and set up a process to be present for when that next surprise happens, right? And in investing is no different. There will always be surprises, right? The trick is to confront the fact that there will always be surprises and changes that surprise you outside of your control. Have you built your process such that you can not only just build a process that is as robust or resilient to those as you can, but also to potentially capitalize on them, right? And when the surprise comes, like when my mental processes break down and I look back at the end of the day and I haven't gotten done what I need to get done, how do I learn from that so that I get better and more resilient and improve from the surprises and the mistakes? The wealth management has the same. The surprises are going to happen, right? We got to count on them. The success of the process can't be tied to the outcome, right? That this only is worthwhile if this one stock doubles in 90 days.
Right.
The change in value of the security is outside of your control by and large. And if it's in your control, you're probably doing things that aren't strictly legal, right?
Right. No, and so I think that's a great way, and this is high performance, right?
Yes.
This is high performance. It's not controlling outcomes. It's not controlling the world. It is moving nimbly within it, understanding what removes friction, right? Very cool. And so once again, the financial world, the health world, the personal world, all these things, relationships and communication, all of these things that make life worthwhile, the sandal tans and everything else, the things that make life worthwhile are all kind of governed by the same, and we can apply the same rules of performance to all of these things and live in extraordinary ways.
Hell yeah. Works for me. Nice conversation.
Another good one.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Flow of Money podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about John and Dave at theflowofmoneypodcast.com. If you liked this episode, share it with someone who's ready to step into flow. If you're interested in sponsorship or collaboration, we'd love to hear from you. See you next time.
Hey, before you go, this is John O'Dea here for the quick note. I am affiliated with Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC, and my investment advisory services are offered through Raymond James Financial Services, Inc. Dave Gieselman, my partner, is not a registered broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services. Any opinions are mine and Dave's. These opinions are not necessarily those of Raymond James. Every investor situation is unique, and you should consider your investment goals, risk tolerance, and time horizon before making any investment decisions. Neither Raymond James Financial Services nor Raymond James Financial Advisors render any tax advice. Tax matters should be discussed with your tax advisor. This podcast is for investor education purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment advice. Consult your investment advisor before making investment decisions.